Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
So great to talk to you.
Thank you. It's good to meet you.
So you also wrote two essays for the book. You wrote an individual essay as well as a joint essay with your daughter, Allison, who we're going to be speaking with in just a moment here. Um, they're both really, really interesting personal accounts. So I'm curious if you could share with us sort of your story and your journey here with this issue.
It's a journey with quite a background. I invested 30 years in pastoral ministry in various roles in Nazarene churches. Um, One of the more enjoyable roles was that of an educator. I served as an adjunct online professor, and I served in a district school of ministry on one of the districts where I served. And I was responsible for helping folks to work toward their ordination. And in the process, I was using prescribed curriculum that was set up by the church. And I found that sometimes I was bumping into things I wasn't absolutely committed to myself. And that wasn't necessarily related to the issue of gender or any orientation type issues, but it was just a sense that there was a little bump between the doctrine that I had believed in and given my life to for so many years.
Mhm.
So when my daughter came out, that was a little bigger bump,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that was a bump that was personal, painful, and it caused me to accelerate a process that I was already on, and that is evaluating what I'm doing. Today, I'm not in local pastoral ministry. I serve as a hospice chaplain. Um, I'm in our environment now where I have to be fully engaging and fully encouraging and supporting of folks from not only various orientations but various world religions and so forth.
Mhm.
And I find myself in a world where now, even though I'm currently attending a Nazarene church, um, I feel like I'm doing that from a distance.
Mhm. Mhm. That's
Uh,
a hard position to be in.
well, it can be, yes,
Mhm.
yes, but it's one that's it gave me space, however,
Mhm.
so that when Allison came out to us, I had I had a little bit of buffer, um, and I didn't have um, to make a career change because of it, as I think some have.
Have in this sort of shift and putting distance in the church, has your sort of affirming stance and your daughter's coming out had any effect on your relationships with colleagues and in your congregation? How has that changed your sort of relationship to other people?
I'm in the process of really kind of discovering that even just now, as it just wasn't something that that I didn't walk out in the highways and byways and declare that my daughter had come out.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't a thing really for a while, and um, now that the book has come out, and I'm in a place where I have actually a platform to talk about that. Um, I'm kind of waiting to see what happens. I've had a little pushback, former students, people that have bumped into me online that I didn't have any indication they were even following, but have raised questions, and some of them not very nicely, but
Mm.
that's okay.
Yep. That's how it goes sometimes.
Mhm.
So the role of a parent, I feel like I think often is you teaching your child, but this is a really big shift. I'm curious what sort of lessons you learned from your daughter through this process. And I think we might bring her into the conversation here after you brag on her maybe a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Allison's been my biggest fan and one of my greatest teachers.
Mm.
And we've had some conversation here tonight about the use of language. I'm learning to speak a new language, and she's been helpful with that. I've been looking at the world, the whole universe differently. One of the reasons for that is because Tom has me doing a lot of weird reading these days. But but it's a great experience. It's a hard lesson to learn, and I'm having to give myself some grace there to not feel like I've got to jump too far at one time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's bring Allison in to hear her perspective as well, and I'm curious of her take on your guys' joint writing these the interview together. Allison, can you talk a bit about your experience coming out to your parents and also in writing this essay with your dad?
Well, I'm very much not alone in the sentiment that, coming out was one of the worst days of my life. I indeed have been my dad's biggest fan, probably since my first conscious moment. And that relationship has meant more to me than, any other relationship over time. And so there was definitely the difficulty of looking at my relationship with him as my best friend, favorite human, and then my spiritual advisor. As a pastor's kid, we tend to sort of hold those both in our hands at the same time, and I didn't know how to reconcile them, and I was paralyzed at the thought of losing either of those components, and presumably both. And we did lose our way for a time, and that was extraordinarily painful. And that's, I think, why I felt really strongly about committing to writing the piece together, because we are lucky enough to have both been committed to fighting for our relationship and putting the work in together to restore that and strengthen that, because a lot of people don't get that opportunity and don't share that experience. And I'm incredibly grateful that we were both able to find ourselves in a place together to put that work in, and to kind of turn around from what was really one of my greatest personal tragedies, in losing the person that had always meant the most to me over something that I didn't know how to control about myself. I heard a couple other people tonight talk about not having the words or the understanding to be able to know how to come out to themselves. Like, I didn't know how to come out to myself before I could come out to other people. And it's hard when you grow up knowing that being gay is a sin that you choose. And so why would you ever choose to sin? So of course, that's just not an option. And I didn't even have the language in my own brain to name myself. And by the time that I was able to name myself, I had already been taught to hate what I could name about myself. And that's really damaging for young people.
Wow.
You have to either get rid of yourself or get rid of that religious subculture that's feeding into the hatred of yourself. And I found myself right in the middle of that, not knowing what to do, and seeing my dad as being a part of the thing cultivating that hate, even though it wasn't coming from him. I was so afraid that I would be caught in that with him.
Wow. Tracy, hearing Allison talk about this real hurt that she experienced, I mean, what was your reaction in understanding that this is what she was going through?
I felt probably as lost as she did. I didn't have tools.
Mhm.
I didn't have what Janelle was talking about. And it wasn't that it wasn't available. I was so locked into my orthodoxy that it just was never something I availed myself of,
Mm.
and was never encouraged to. Now I'm taking, I'm not assessing blame here. I'm responsible for what what I've chosen to do and so forth. But it was just not a scenario I had ever run up the flagpole. And I didn't know, the words were coming out of her mouth and I was hearing them, but I didn't know what they meant.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I think
I
that
just,
sorry, go right ahead.
I just knew that I loved my daughter,
Mhm.
and that would never change. What was really the most painful thing was that I honestly believe, and I believe to this day, Allison, you would affirm this, I think, that you were probably concerned that that I wouldn't accept you.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, and that was terrifying.
Yeah, that breaks my heart.
And I think that what's difficult is, I grew up, bringing everything to you, processing everything with you. That was my favorite thing to do, was like, oh, I found a thing, I don't know what to do with it. Let's talk. And then when I needed you most, I didn't know how to access you in that way.
Yeah, that was I know that was painful.
Yeah.
So from this moment of real pain, I mean, your relationship now it seems has come obviously really far. And Allison, you talked about doing the work. What does that work look like? What does that mean? What did you need from your dad? And Tracy, what did you need from Allison to get to where you are now?
It was a long road of a lot of uncomfortable conversations. I wanted him to feel my pain, and I wanted him to understand things that he wasn't yet prepared to understand. And I wanted him to jump ahead to where I already was. And I remember, we had never, to my memory, really fought or even disagreed. I mean, I think I mentioned it in, I don't remember which piece, but one of them, I mentioned how this was the first thing I ever disagreed with my dad on that I can remember. And I think many of us who have a healthy relationship with our parents have maybe that moment you remember being like, am I allowed to disagree? And this was it for me. And it was even more layered as a pastor's kid, him not just being my dad, but being my counselor, being my spiritual advisor, my pastor. Am I allowed to disagree? How could I know so much less. How could I disagree? But knowing what I knew about myself, or what I was starting to know about myself. And so we had never really had a real argument of any tangible, real, I don't know, nothing that we had ever gone back and forth about like this. And there were a lot of calls where I was just I didn't want to talk. But I took the call anyway, because I needed to believe that something I would say at some point would hit. And I remember just being you don't understand, I'm hurting, you're hurting me with with what you're saying. I'm not feeling you, seeing me and hearing me. And at one point I remember him just being well, I'm hurting. I'm hurting too. So I think we were just hurting together for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
and wasn't even productive a lot of the times. We were just hurting together, is what I remember of that, or the early phases.
Yeah, Tracy, what during this experience of hurting together, what do you think was really some turning points for you of important moments in this relationship?
Well, somewhere along the line, I made a decision that whatever it meant that I was a Nazarene elder, member of a denomination, a participant, teacher, pastor, whatever that means. It was not as important to me as supporting and embracing my daughter, and then more than that, to really begin to explore what it means to be where she is. What does it mean that that she's in this kind of pain? And even though I don't understand it, I don't get it. I mean, that was my position was I don't understand this, but I want to find out what it is. So I began to do some exploring, to do some reading, to talk to some people.
Yeah.
So I think so I guess I wanted to try to I didn't want to sacrifice my daughter on the altar of orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to find out who she was and what it means that she's gay, and and lean into that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So many people in this denomination and outside are going to be or have been in your exact same shoes, and are struggling with how to proceed. And I think a real tool that we've put in our toolkit today is to have compassion for yourself and to set boundaries for yourself and to prioritize your own needs here. So in thinking back to this, this relationship with each other, and I'll ask this of each of you, what do you think if you could tell, yourself in that moment, the day that Allison came out to Tracy, what would you tell yourself then, knowing now where your relationship is? And we'll start off with Tracy.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Allison, I don't think she ever felt comfortable enough to come out to me. I had to raise the question.
Mm.
I did not create an environment that she could come out to, and that's on me.
Mm.
That environment should have begun 20 years earlier. There should have been conversations earlier on to establish an environment, a home, a safe space for whatever the issue was, whether it was being gay or whether there was some other issue. And I don't want to try to figure out what that could look like, but just to say that I had not done an adequate job of creating safe space. And that's something I'll probably, for the rest of my life, struggle with. And having not, that'll be a failure in my book. So I guess that's my answer.
Thank you. Allison?
I don't want to go back to that moment. That was the beginning of a long series of losses, with family and friends, and my job at ENC as a faculty member, and my community in a lot of ways. And I guess concurrently with that, it was the beginning of, not just loss, but also a lot that I gained, just internally and, within myself. And it's not always it's not a situation where I feel comfortable trying to tie a ribbon on it, because it's not okay, and it's not something that I want to excuse or say like, but there's a silver lining, because for a lot of it there wasn't. But I'm here. I guess I would say that. And yes, Forrest, I did. And that is still a problem that I feel like that's one of the reasons why, like, yeah, I don't want to put a silver lining on it. There isn't one, but yeah, I'm here. So it didn't take me down in the way that I thought it would, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is so powerful, and I think really a perfect example of what we're trying to do here is to allow
Absolutely.
spaces for this to happen, that it's not a silver lining, it's not all okay, it's not a happy ending all the time, and sometimes there's not an ending, you're still in the middle of it, but there's still joy and beauty and love there in the midst. So yes, thank you both so much for your vulnerability, and for really modeling to us what this looks like in the nitty-gritty in those really close, loving relationships. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye,
Love you,
Dad.
sweetie.
Well, I wasn't expecting to be crying tonight.
There were a lot of shed tears I was seeing on that.
My goodness.
And in this real moment of vulnerability, Dad, it really makes me think about our time together working on this book and what that's meant. And while I think our story isn't quite the same, I'll say this. Going through your experience being fired from NNU a few years ago, I was in college at the time and felt really far from the family, and it was really hard to be distant. And I engaged so much in that time through the Facebook group, the Support Tom Ward Facebook group. And it was an experience of being mediated elsewhere, and that was really hard to not be able to really process all that together. And now you went through the same trial again, and we worked on this project together, and there's another Facebook group, and this Facebook group and what's arisen from it, this conference, has been so healing, I think, and also uncovering a lot of the hurt that I still have from the church over the years. And yeah, I just am really, really glad to be loved by you and to be working on this together.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have a response for that. Well, we didn't talk about how we were going to end the evening.
Well, I also don't think we all expected to be crying.
No. Yeah, that's right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks everyone who shared. Thanks to everyone who showed up. Thanks for all the great stuff in the chat. There's really two conferences going on. It's the chat and then the conversation with people, and they're intertwined, but in some ways they're also separate. It's been fun. And this is just the first night. Tomorrow night we start at the same time, and our focus is going to be more hearing from leaders and scholars. You're going to hear probably more Bible tomorrow night, more theology than you did tonight. Not that one is better than the other. The stories we heard tonight and the testimonies were just so powerful. Being an ally, speaking out as queer. I mean, it's been so good. Thanks again to everybody. What a powerful evening. and I hope you're able to join us again tomorrow night.